is the Pittsburgh Steelers hosting the Washington football team.
Right here.
This is a 42.5 point over-under. Pittsburgh favored by a whopping 8 points here. We look at the Washington football side of things. Johnny, I'll kick it to you for Terry McLaurin. Are you feeling as confident as you would any week with Terry McLaurin? Does the tough, Pittsburgh defense scare you off? Is there anybody else in the passing core you like?
I'm not scared off one bit from Terry McLaurin, knowing that they're facing the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Look, when you're looking at this, their D front is the scariest part of that whole entire offense. Then you got their safeties, Mika Fitzpatrick. Those guys are pretty scary too, but not as scary as Terry McLaurin. Because look, since Week 9 when Alex Smith took over, Terry McLaurin has 33 targets. The other two Sims wide receivers only have 22 targets combined. So he is getting he's triple targeting, out targeting any other wide receiver here. And during that span, since Week 9 and Alex Smith taking over, Terry McLaurin's lowest yardage output has been 84 receiving yards. I look for that to continue this week because Pittsburgh giving up on average 23.6 fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and I expect the vast majority of that to go to Terry McLaurin.
We see Terry McLaurin do it against James Bradbury, against some lockdown corners. Joe Hayden isn't somebody that really scares me off of Terry McLaurin this week, so I like that take there. Austin, I wanted to pitch it to you on Logan Thomas because we know he's putting up great peripheral numbers. This Steelers defense is no joke, though, so would you trust Logan Thomas in your lineup as a streamable tight end in Week 13?
It's tough going up against that real difficult Steelers defense, who also ranks as the #1 defense against the tight end, fewest points allowed to the tight end position over the season. But Logan Thomas's role is so solidified in the Washington football team's offense. He never comes off the field, basically, and his floor, he's like the ultimate floor play tight end for me. He has 60 yards and a touchdown in at least 60 yards or a touchdown in 4 of his last 6 games. And since Alex Smith has taken over, he's seen 6 targets or more. 4 targets in every game that Alex Smith has started. Last week, Logan Thomas went 4 for 4. Rushed the ball for 3 yards and also completed a 28-yard pass. Passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards. Logan Thomas is in all the time, just not hitting a ceiling for you. And I don't think that's going to happen. Despite all of this solid opportunity, he's broken double-digit points just 4 times with a season high of 14. High floor, but still a tight touchdown-dependent tight end. And this week against that real tough Steelers defense, lower your expectations even further.
I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about Antonio Gibson. Well, obviously, this guy is killing it right now. 11 rushing touchdowns on 139 carries. That's a 7.9% touchdown rate right now. If you look at Kamara in 2018, one of his groundbreaking seasons, the most efficient seasons we've maybe ever seen out of a running back, he had 14 touchdowns on 194 carries. That was a 7.2%. So right now, Gibson is on pace to have one of the most efficient seasons we've ever seen, really become a great asset for fantasy. 30th out of 37 running backs, though, with 75-plus attempts with 2.45 yards per contact per attempt. So he is, getting it done because of touchdowns, it looks like. I mean, he's been an efficient runner for the most part. He's had phenomenal production. We're just wondering if at some point it's a little bit too good to be true, and if the bottom falls out. And this is a tough matchup. We're not going to, sugarcoat it any way. And the schedule gets tough for him. He's got San Francisco next, Seattle, Carolina, then Philly. So really tough matchups down the stretch. But Gibson is still in your lineup as a converted wide receiver, as a guy that can get involved in the passing game and has been their touchdown running back. He could fall in any game. I do want to bring up J.D. McKissick quickly here because I know people are asking. Back-to-back games with fewer than 5 targets for McKissick now. 5 catches total for 47 yards over the last couple weeks. And then you look at Pittsburgh. This isn't a great matchup. Even though you would think maybe that they'll dink and dunk with McKissick in this game, Pittsburgh's only allowed 32 catches and 232 receiving yards all year to running backs. That's the lowest mark by any team. So really not excited about J.D. McKissick, and I'm tempering expectations on Antonio Gibson. On the other side of the ball, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers, Johnny, and I wanted to give it to you for Eric Ebron because he's been kind of that locked in startable tight end, and this should be another spot for him to get it done for you.
Yeah, I think that Eric Ebron is going to be a guy that you can plug and play for the rest of the season. I don't think he's no longer a streaming tight end. I think he's going to be one of the top 7 tight ends the rest of the season. You look at this matchup, 13th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends Washington gives up. So that's kind of where they give up the most yardage for this team. And then you look at Eric Ebron. Since week 5, he's only seen less than 6 targets in a game twice, and he scored a touchdown in his last 3 out of 5 games. So I think that they continue to use him. Big Ben looks for him, and I think that you can continue to trust him in your lineup.
Yeah, so you brought up Big Ben there, throwing him the football. I'm kind of worried about Big Ben this week. I don't think I'd be willing to put him in my lineup if I'm trying to make the playoffs. He's been the QB12 in most formats. He's had back-to-back weeks, though, under 18 fantasy points. And after 3 straight weeks without an interception, he has back-to-back games with a pick. Washington, tied for second in sacks this season with 36. They're only allowing 16.9 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. That's 10th worst matchup to face. They've also surrendered the 4th fewest passing touchdowns this year. So I'm actually a little bit concerned about Big Ben this week. But, Austin, as we look at the pass catchers, maybe you can talk me into Big Ben based on what you think about these wide receivers and especially this matchup.
Yeah, they got 3 good ones there in Diontae Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Chase Claypool. Now, Washington football team's pass defense does clock as the number 3 ranked pass defense. So they're no joke, but neither are these wide receivers. The question really comes of, how do we rank these guys? They've been up and down and shifting around a lot all season long, but I think we've got enough data right now to feel confident about what their prescribed roles are for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's start with their number 1, and that's Diontae Johnson. There's not a ton that needs to be said about this man. He's the number 9 wide receiver over the last month. He's had 50 targets in 4 weeks. 50 targets. I know Johnny's got some really good stats on how involved Diontae Johnson has been. He's a wide receiver 1. Then you got Juju Smith-Schuster and Chase Claypool, though, who have not been bad by any stretch of the imagination. Juju Smith-Schuster also, so we can cleanly kind of say it like this. Juju Smith-Schuster is involved more. He gets more targets by a little bit. He's got a much lower A.5 yards per reception there for Juju Smith-Schuster's average depth of target, but he catches at a really high clip. He's the number 21 wide receiver in PPR, the number 22 standard, and he only has 4 games this year of single-digit performance. He's a really consistent player. He doesn't have that boom appeal as much where Chase Claypool does. Double-digit fantasy points in the last 4 of the last 5 weeks, 8+ targets over the last 5 weeks for Chase Claypool, but he hasn't broken 70 yards since week 6. He is a touchdown-dependent wide receiver if you're going to bank on his ceiling. That's really where it comes from him. And despite him being on the field quite a bit less than Juju Smith-Schuster from a snap share percentage, he's right there with him in terms of red zone targets. 13 red zone targets on the year compared to 16 for Juju Smith-Schuster. So just a little bit more, and Chase Claypool comes down with them. A really nice rate. So you got I go 1, 2, 3 in that order: Diontae Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool's got the higher ceiling than Juju Smith-Schuster, but you're just banking on a touchdown, which is hard to do, especially this week going up against a pretty stout Washington pass defense.
Pretty jealous of Johnny and Austin in this matchup because they get to talk about the guys you trust in this offense, and I get to talk about the guys I probably don't feel great about trusting. And that started with Ben Roethlisberger, and it's going to continue here for the running backs, and specifically Benny Snell. Outside of red zone opportunities, Snell is just not a good asset this year. You look at the way the Steelers are a pass-heavy offense because of those wide receivers. They like to dink and dunk their way down the field. I mean, at the same time that they are pass-heavy, Austin, you talked about the average depth of target for Juju and some of these guys. They do quick slants. They're trying to get the ball down the field. That's the extension of their running game. You look at in 9 career games with double-digit carries, Benny Snell's only scored a touchdown in 2 of them. Week 12, only 16 attempts, 4 targets. This is good game script. I'll give them that. I mean, they're favored by more than a touchdown, but it's still a low over-under. It's still a situation where I think Pittsburgh's more. I mean, we watched last week against Baltimore when they're up by 12. They didn't run it a single time on a drive and ended up punting it. I just don't know that they want to run the football as much as we thought at the beginning of the year. And so it really concerns me for Benny Snell. I mean, obviously, if you're looking, you need the production in your flex spot this week. I could throw Snell in there, but other than that, I would kind of fade Benny Snell. Our next matchup on the slate is the San Francisco 49ers hosting the Buffalo Bills on Monday Night Football. This is a 47.5 point over-under. No team is favored. It's an even money game. Before we get into this, make sure if you like what you're seeing in the content, you like and subscribe to the channel here at the Fantasy Whispers. Go ahead and give us a comment below and let us know your start-sit questions for this game. We start with the Buffalo Bills side of the ball, Johnny. I think we got to start with the running backs, and you help us decipher if any of these guys are worth a start here.
That's the big explanation there. No, San Francisco giving up 8th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. You don't like the matchup. And then you look at what Buffalo is doing specifically with those two running backs, Zach Moss and Devin Singletary. Well, Devin Singletary, we'll start with him. He's played on less than 50% of snaps for 4 straight weeks since Zach Moss has come back from the injury. The interesting thing, though, is that he's only seen less than 11 total touches twice this season, even with Zach Moss back in the lineup. Buffalo seems to be content with giving Singletary the between the 20s, the touches between the 20s, which would give him an RB/flex for me with Devin Singletary. Not really interested. Zach Moss, on the other hand, he's played on 50-plus snaps for 4 straight weeks, but on the opposite side of that, he's only seen more than 11 total touches twice this season. So Buffalo seems content with just giving him between 9 and 11 total touches per week. So he also remains just an RB3/flex. However, he does have the touchdown upside because he is the goal line back. So if you do have to throw one of these guys in there, I'm more confident in Zach Moss, but I would try to look elsewhere if I can.
A lot of the case against Josh Allen this week is the tough San Francisco defense, and then obviously Josh Allen himself been a little bit more up and down lately than what we saw at the beginning of the season. So just running through that, he's only thrown for over 300 yards, only once in the last 4 games, and he's got 4 turnovers in his last 2. But I'm actually kind of pumped about this matchup against San Francisco. I know they're the 11th best against QBs, only 16.9 fantasy points per game allowed to the position. But no team in the NFL right now has given up more rushing yards to quarterbacks than San Francisco. They've given up 341 rushing yards on the season. So I actually think that Josh Allen's floor is going to make him really nice. And we've seen Josh Allen get it done against tough defenses. We saw him do it against the Rams. And so I think there's a point where Josh Allen's ceiling comes into play. And if that floor is there with the rushing, I really do like him. Austin, when we go to the pass catchers, especially Stefan Diggs and Cole Beasley, what are you seeing out of them, and where's your concern level against the San Fran defense?
It's not really that significant, my concern for these wide receivers and the defense that they're going up against here in San Francisco. Now, San Francisco does clock in of letting up the 10th fewest points to the wide receiver position, but given these 2 wide receivers and their locked-in roles with the team now that John Brown is out, I'm not concerned about it. Stefan Diggs had his worst week all season last week in week 12. The man still had 7.4 fantasy points. That was his worst week all season long. 7 receptions on 9 targets for 39 yards. I'm not concerned about that at all, though, given he led the team in targets by more than double. He had 9 versus Cole Beasley's 4. That brings us to Mr. Beasley himself, who's had an 80% snap share plus the last 2 weeks. He had a great week in week 11, going 11 catches on 13 targets, 109 yards in that nice tutty, but he came back down to earth then. Horde last week there, but he did get you saved on a nice touchdown pass. That was his 3rd touchdown pass, though, in the course of 4 or 5 years. I wouldn't expect to see that be a regular part of his game, but it's nice to see the man still involved in all different kinds of capacities on the offense. But otherwise just went 2 for 4 with 25 yards otherwise. So I'm not feeling great about Cole Beasley. If you have to roll him out there, he's going to be on the field a lot. He's going to get at least 4 targets going his way. And we know what his ceiling is. We saw it the week before last. But Stefan Diggs, he's locked in every single given week. 0 reason for concern.
Yeah, with John Brown on the injured reserve. Oh, yeah, go for it, Sammy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would just kind of lend a little bit more confidence there to Cole Beasley as well. Cole Beasley and Stefan Diggs are 1 out of, I think, 5 different wide receiver duos who are both averaging over 2 yards per route run. Beasley, when he's on the field, he's been getting it done as well. And I think you can look at him as like a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 option, even with John Brown out.
I think especially with John Brown out, he's been very dominant with John Brown out. Now, last week he got, like Austin said, he had to get it done through the air as a thrower, but I think he's definitely could bounce back in this spot. This is one of it's not a terribly high over under, but it's not a low over under either. 47.5 could be a little bit of a shootout with these two teams, high octane offenses. So actually, I'll go to the San Francisco side of the ball here, Summy, and I'll start with you with those running backs because that's the motor that makes the San Fran offense go. And they got Mostert back last week, Jeff Wilson back last week. How are you feeling about these RBs?
Yeah, I think this is another week where it's going to make us kind of say as a consensus, like Kyle Shanahan plays Mirage with his running backs, where we don't know which one he's starting, but that's not true. I mean, we know the roles here, right? It's pretty clearly defined. Raheem Mostert is the starter. He came back last week against a tough defense against the Rams, and he still had a 40% snap share his first game back. So this week it's going to go up. And those people that are looking at Jeff Wilson as a waiver ad, like I'll just tell you to stop it right now. None of these running backs are going to be relevant as long as Raheem Mostert is on the field. Shanahan loves Raheem Mostert. And this is coming from a guy who didn't believe Raheem Mostert would have this role coming into this year. I thought it would be a committee. Raheem Mostert would be involved, but like he wouldn't be the lead guy. But clearly, the games that he's been healthy, we've seen that he's the guy, right? He had the lone red zone carry last week as well. So, I mean, everything is pointing up for him. And this week, going up against Buffalo, who's allowing the 9th most fantasy points for running backs at 22 per game and allowing the 6th highest EPA per rush play, I mean, I think Raheem Mostert is in a smash spot, and I think we're going to see him deliver.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that, all the news that Detroit and Jacksonville and Green Bay get about being a bad or a good matchup against running backs. Buffalo's like right behind them. Like they're one of the worst matchups too, or at least one of the best matchups to target your running backs against. Johnny,
Yep.
You were really interested in talking about Jordan Reid through this passing attack. We've seen obviously with Kittle out, the deflated tight end usage here, but do you think Jordan Reid has a spot to bounce back here?
I love finding the tight end gems that you can stream week to week. It's always fun. It's a desert landscape out there, so if you can find a couple beautiful desert flowers on those cacti, then I'm gonna do that for you. And I do think that Jordan Reid is another option for you this week. Look, 9th most points allowed to the tight end position with on average 9.4 fantasy points. Does Buffalo give up? And then you look at Jordan Reid. I understand he had a bad week last week. I totally get it. It was disgusting. But he's seen 6 or more targets in 4 out of 6 games this year, and they have a very favorable matchup against Buffalo, who are allowing 373.1 yards from scrimmage on the year per game, right? As their defense their defense as a whole. And then you look at what Reid should be able to do. He should see around 6 targets once again, which gives him a chance to deliver on a decent PPR game, but his upside is limited in this offense.
For me, I wanted to take a look at the wide receivers here because we obviously are probably going to have Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel back together in this game, depending on what happens with Ayuk's status. But, we'll start with Debo Samuel because I think he is the lead dog in this passing attack when he's healthy and when they're both on the field. And he absolutely wrecked, for you if you start him last week in a tough matchup against the Rams, too. He went 11 for 13 for 133 yards. He seems to be the perfect weapon for Shanahan in this passing attack. No matter what QB he puts in there, Debo Samuel can get it done. And then you look at Buffalo. They've tightened up a little bit, become more of a run funnel. We talked about how bad they are against the run. But one constant has been the slot getting absolutely torched against them. And so you look at slot corner Teron Johnson. He's been allowing 1.48 yards per route run to slot wide receivers this year. I think with Ayuk back, Samuel's actually going to dominate a lot of the slot snaps on the field and actually get moved around a lot there. So I actually do think that Samuel is the start here. And I'm okay fading Ayuk. Lack of consistent snaps in the offense. When they've played together, it's taken really good matchups for Brandon Ayuk to get it done. And he projects to face Levi Wallace, who is the worst matchup of all the corners in Buffalo, only giving up 0.78 yards per route run to wide receivers this year. So a little bit afraid of Ayuk in this game with both of them back, but I love Debo Samuel's matchup. Austin, anything quickly on Nick Mullins here?
He has more multiple interception games than he does multiple touchdown games. I'm going to fade him this week and forever.
Yep. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you like what you saw, go ahead and click subscribe. And if you want to watch more fantasy football content, check out one of these videos.